Hey, what's up? Big Earl, Northtownsound, how's it going? Victoria Day weekend. It's pouring rain. I can't do any work that I need to do outside. We need the rain though, so I'm not going to complain. That's King Buzzo. Some of you will get that. And I was playing around with some tunings. Figured out I need a guitar and a tuning that I'm kind of digging. And King Buzzo's been sitting gathering dust, so that's what's going to happen to him. And this is a no-name, made in Japan LP copy. And part of this is going to be about setup, part of it's going to be about wiring things, and part of it's just going to be learning you about these things. Because there's a lot of myths about these things. I'm going to start with a little background. I spent a lot of time in the 90s fixing and flipping these things up. Back when you could get these things locally. As usual, I've got to explain, I'm in Edmonton, Canada. I was able to pick these things up for like 20, 30 bucks. Fix them up, do some wiring on them, and make some drug money, basically. I've probably worked on 100, 150 of these kind of LP copies. And I just find it painful when I hear what people are saying about these nowadays, and it needs to be discussed. So you're going to learn a little bit here and break some of the myths that are off. And this is a really good example because I know the provenance of this guitar. Now, this guitar was sold through Sears Canada. I remember this in the catalogs when I was, I don't know, like 13, 14, somewhere in there. And these were like 90 bucks, something like that. So this would be sort of the step up from like the budget early Korean harmonies that they would make, that were the Tysco tulip bodies. Then he would hit this, and then he would hit things with brand names. So this guitar, when it was new, was under 100 bucks. Okay? This is a guitar that was built to a price point and not a quality point. Don't ask me how many years ago, but it was right after the Memory Boy came out. I went to the acoustic music shop here in town, and they had a Memory Boy. And I was like, ooh, I want to try this thing out. And they were having their Boxing Day sale, and I forget what it was. It was like 10% off the effects and 20% off the guitars or something like that. So I grabbed this thing off the wall to try with the Memory Boy there. And I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of fun. I could play with this. And take it up to the till, and I get my discount on that. And Buddy rings this up and gives me the discount on this. And I was like, dude, you're asking 75 bucks for this guitar. That's fine. And he was like, no, sale price. So I got this for $62.50 Canadian, which right now is about 18 bucks US. I don't know. The dollar sucks. Set this up, gave this some love that it never had before. And this was a primary humbucker guitar for me for a couple of years. Recorded a lot with this. And then one of the things you got to watch on guitars like this, or 60s guitars, is sometimes you can give them too much loving. Kind of like that crazy uncle or aunt that you have that has the, you know, the 45, 50-pound cat. That they're like, here, Tibbles, have another snack. Sometimes when you give things too much loving, it goes the wrong way. And this is a good example of what happens when you give too much love into one of these things. This is going to be really hard to shoot. This is something where I need a real camera. What's happening is there is a twist that's developed on the low part of the neck, down there under the low E string, or what's normally a low E string. And it's rising a bit on this side. So it's sinking there, rising there. Why would it do that? Well, this is my opinion. When you get a twisted neck, it's not because the strings twisted it or because of the pull of the strings. Wood will twist over time. Wood wants to go where it wants to go. And probably what happened was this guitar always had a little bit of a flip in the neck. I straightened it out, and by doing that, because the truss rod does work on this guitar, but typical of this era, it's not a tight fitting truss rod. So by getting the neck into a playable position, it probably exasperated the forces that made the neck want to twist. Now, is it a piece of firewood twist? No, but this guitar will never play brilliantly. I have tried to rack this neck using clamps a gazillion times. Well, not a gazillion, probably 4 times now. And it's just, it keeps setting back in the same place. So the neck is basically doing a tilt like that, if you can picture that. Fine here, not bad here. It's right in the middle section. I could heat press this. I've always found heat pressing necks means that you get to heat press them again in 6 months. So really, the playability went way down on this thing. So I kind of took off all the good parts that I had put on here and just kind of slapped it together. And then I strung it up, broke a string, and the pickup decided to stop working that I put in there. So it's been sitting for a year. So we're going to revitalize it. Let me just show you another couple of quick points. People will always advertise these guitars as being made at the, quote, legendary Makasudo factory. Or sometimes they'll say the legendary Matasudo factory. Because that was the only place that built guitars, and it was the only decent factory in Japan. Which, of course, is bullshit. Fujijangaki did lots of stuff. There was lots of great factories. The way they try to shill this, though, is they're like, you can always tell it was made at Matasudo because it says, if I can focus in, made in Japan. That will not focus. Anyways, trust me, it says that it made in Japan. And therefore, legendary factories. Well, you know, back in the 70s, it wasn't unlike nowadays where if, you know, crazy Hidio's guitar manufacturing washing machine concern needed to get some neck plates, they'd get a hold of a company that sold neck plates. It wasn't like they were cutting their own. And they probably said, made in Japan. So, this was definitely not made at a legendary factory, or if it did, it's because they had a power bill to pay that month. Because this is not a well-constructed guitar. See? Made in Japan. Definitely not a legendary factory. This guitar is kind of interesting because at one point, there's all these numbers that are on here. And you'll notice RCAF, Royal Canadian Air Force. So I'm not quite sure if this was a guitar that was purchased by the Canadian Air Force or was just from some servicemen. Considering how cheap it is, it probably was from the servicemen, because God only knows we still don't pay our military folks any decent money. Oh, these cracks are new. Cool. So anyways, that made in Japan thing means nothing. Here's another scam they try to pull. People will advertise, if you see a guitar that's closer to the actual Kalamazoo peg head, a lawsuit, that means that it was made at one of the good factories. Well, you take a bandsaw and go, it means nothing. Like, look at the binding work there. See, here it'll focus. You know, like this was not a quality built guitar. And I love the split diamond on this. It's like, how small can we make that? Okay, I'm going to give you guys a lesson from the voice of experience. If you ever find a G-style copy that has a tailpiece like this, what's wrong with this picture? Versus a proper G-style, and I don't have a spare one of these kicking around, so just off a Magpie, where it latches in. If it's this style, where it just goes through the top, that is the sign of a guitar that is a bottom feeder when it comes to these things. I don't know what it is, but every one of these that I've worked on, it has a tailpiece like that. There's serious construction issues with it, or serious wood issues. So I think these were kind of like the cheapest ones that they could get at the time. And yes, the bridge has been changed because normally you're going to find something like this with the plastic saddles. Everybody laughs at that. That's actually the Japanese copying what Gibson was doing in the 60s with the nylon saddles. These tend to crumble all the time. I'm not even quite sure which guitar this one's off of, but that one's actually in about the best shape. This is really common on the cheap ones too. So it's obviously a plywood body, which means nothing. But they would route these things to within a millimeter of their lives, right? Like that's insane how tight they made that, to the point where that poor volume control just cracked right through, and tried fixing it with a washer, and yeah, I'm bypassing it, doesn't mean anything. So that's a big structural point you got to watch on these. And this is the other classic one. Note the neck. Note how it's bolted on. It's crooked. And that's a common thing on these things too. Good ones you'll find are straight and they're centered. If they're just dashed on like this, usually the build isn't worth it. So here's what the 20 is. Is this a hunk of firewood? I honestly don't think a guitar, unless it's busted, is a hunk of firewood. It's just, is this ever going to be a magnificent playing guitar again? Probably because I screwed up that neck by giving it too much love, no. But we're going to throw it in a crazy tuning, set it up, fix the wiring on it, and have a little bit of fun with it, shall we? Problem is, iPod's dead. I'm going to swap over to the iPad. Should really figure out some lighting solutions in here for y'all. For the three of you who don't know, one of the best guitar working tools you can get is an old piece of low E string, because this B is jammed in there and doesn't want to come out. So just go like that and pushes right out. Brilliant tool. Always have a bunch of these. And I usually have like some bass ones around too, because they're really handy in wiring. I took the neck off because I can. And this is what I'm talking about. Look at how they had drilled that. And you see that dibble there? That was from the factory. So, yeah. A little out, which is typical. Just realized that I had slapped a nut on here that's too high, so I'm gonna have to bring it down. Can't find my bastard file, so I got this thing, so we'll go for that. This is another point that people will use if I can get this silly thing to zoom in and look. Okay, you see this. This is distinctly mahogany. And people use that as a selling point. Oh, it's a mahogany neck. Which doesn't mean anything because, you know, easy wood to get. The one thing I will give with these guitars is the mahogany seemed to be a little bit stiffer than what existed in the US at the time. And the fretboard is a big old slab. They're usually kind of planed weird. But, I don't know, if you're into salvage operations, that's a bonus. But it's not a selling feature, okay? That's just the way it goes. I was also looking to see if I had some... These aren't the original tuners. I wanted to see if I had something that was between this and kind of the Grover knockoffs I have, and I don't. So, I guess those are staying on. So, I kind of really slapped this thing back together. I was robbing it for parts, but... yeah, we'll get it going. Won't take much. File was a bit of a fail. Should have known it was plastic. So onto the sandpaper. I actually think this was the nut that was on here, if I remember correctly, because it looked like it had been changed at one point. And I got to clean up a little bit of goop in the slot. Here's a great tip. Here's my favorite tool for doing that. I just got to sharpen it up a bit. It's just old screwdriver that I had and ground it down and use it as a mini chisel. The only problem is I gotta sharpen it a bit, and since I screwed up some sandpaper. Yeah, I'm a cheap prick. Maximize. This is Norton paper, man. Like this could take a lot more abuse. So I just gotta get rid of some of that stuff that's in there, and then I'll just quickly pop the nut back on. I'm not actually gonna glue that on yet. I want to get the strings on to see, because it's wonky height. So I just oiled the board. It didn't need anything else. Clean this up. So we're gonna go take a look-see at the body. I'll show you another neat little tip that you may not have seen before that you kind of need on these guitars sometimes. Often on these guitars, the neck pocket isn't square and level. There's a lot of ways to deal with that. Big one that I've used for years, I heard about, it's actually really common on 70s F styles too. Is to use the mesh you use on storm doors and storm windows to do it off. This is another way, if you ever get suckered into buying like that stupid aluminum foil shielding stuff that doesn't shield worth a darn, my dumb, you can build up using this. This is actually a divot from a shim that I had in there, which a hair too thick, frankly. So that also shows you how far out those holes were, which is really wonky. I took the neck off of this though, so it's a little bit easier to do the internal surgery in here. So let's pop her open, see what's happening there. Edit here, saving an hour and a half of swearing. Oh, I hate when this happens. So I decide, pick up, volume, tone. Wire up, not working. Checking the pots, swapping the pots, this, that, the other thing. Never thought to check the jack. And then when I go to check the jack, come on, stay there. Look at that. Yeah, that shot. So, this is another thing you got to remember about these guitars. It's not a question that it's a cheap part or anything like that. A lot of these instruments would spend their lives... Okay, it goes like this. Little Debbie wants to get herself a guitar for her birthday. So mom and dad would get her a guitar for her birthday. And she'd play it for 2 weeks and say, oh, this is too hard, and goes under the bed. And then after it's under the bed, it goes into the basement. And then it goes into the attic. And then it goes out into the shed or out into the garage or whatever. It's sitting in areas where the temperature's not even, goes up and down, the humidity's up and down. And this sort of stuff happens, and then some hipster finds one of these things over at a garage sale, picks it up, and then tries to sell it to you for $500. So be aware of that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, I got so goddamn frustrated doing this that it's now pickup to output, which is fine. That's probably always going to be through a fuzz box anyway, so... And I'm sick of soldering. I've breathed in enough fumes and burnt myself enough times today. So I'm just going to wipe this down, assemble it, we'll get it strung up. There's another way to tell a plywood guitar. So on the back, they're running this way. On the front, they're running the other way. Now if you remembered, I didn't glue the nut back in place, because I was a little bit worried about the height on it. And yeah, it was still too high, so I had to take off some extra material. But now, which one is it? Here we go. 20,000 feeler gauge. Maybe a tiny hair high. Where the heck is this? But I'm willing to live with that. So now I can drop a little bit of glue on this thing. And I'll actually use the strings as the clamp on it, which works great when you're working on a cheap thing like this. Okay, again, this is impossible to shoot one-handed, but to try to explain what's going on here, I can't hold that down. On the high strings, I can just get clearance, but on the low strings, when I go in, there's not enough. So the neck's flip, like I said. Up here, if I'm holding down, way down here, I can't get a feeler gauge in, but here I can. So the whole neck's got a kink to it, which is a pain. And, you know, one thing I forgot to point out on this guitar, Another thing about the high quality manufacture of guitars of this era. Let's see what's happening. Yeah. So that's always been an issue with this thing too. So who the heck plays up here? Well, besides me, I guess. An hour's worth of work's turned into 2.5. So you know what? I'm gonna let this sit overnight. I'm gonna check that neck again tomorrow. Probably have to play with it a bit more. Um, Last thing, in case you didn't notice it, you get brittle plastic on these things too. So this thing collapsed on me once, so I tried gluing it back together, which of course looked like shit, and I really don't care. But yeah, I might just leave it off. This time there's a chunk stuck to it, which I find hilarious. So, it's just in the shot there. These guys buy from me. Check out their epic folk metal. It's not what I would call it, but it's interesting stuff, I gotta say. Kind of reminded me of a joke just now a friend of mine made. He said he wanted to start a musical genre called Far Too Stoner Metal, where you just sort of sit there and make a noise and go, dude, whoa! It's the next day, and that's what he's going to be. The neck is still doing this, unfortunately. Still flat here, still flat there, so, and I've got all the tension off of the truss rod. Not much I'm going to be able to do with this. But like I said, drone tuning is probably going to be in nothing but high gain situations anyways, so I'll live with it. I want to try to explain a point that I think I was a little mean on yesterday. I was ripping on Buzzo pretty heavily here. Were all the guitars that were built in this era in Japan junk? No. But like I said, I've worked on 100, 150 of them. And I'd say it's kind of like the real deal, where if you're buying a Kalamazoo one, you got to go through a lot to find decent ones. You know, I remember working, I had an Ibanez one that I fixed and flipped up, and everything was fine on it, just clean and set up, and it had the ugliest cherry burst I've ever seen in my life. It was so cheap looking. And Hondo. Worked on a couple of Hondos that outside of the tuners were actually pretty good. These tuners are actually holding the tuning not bad. That's interesting. But the simple fact of the matter is, what I'm showing you here with this guitar is not the exception to the rule. This is what was happening. What I'm trying to say is, if you've got your heart set on getting a lawsuit copy from the 70s, you gotta be aware that most of these are really not worth the money that people are asking for them, you know. I see these popping up, you know, whether it's locally, whether eBay, Reverb, whatever, and people just want way too much money. You know, frankly, modern Epiphones are built way better than the bulk of these were, and that's a pretty sad thing to say. A lot of modern Epiphones are turkeys too, but the simple fact is, we have an advantage in the modern world when it comes to guitars, and that is the fact that they're machine made. CNC things. So if something gets screwed up, it's far less likely for it to happen, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Just because I'm pointing out Rocket, this fretboard wasn't playing perfectly flat, and given the age of this thing, that fretboard was probably planed by some guy running it through a sheet planer. But the neck fit is immaculate. It's better than anything that you'd find Fullerton would have made back in the 70s. When you're dealing with the hand stuff like this, you know, where it's Buddy with a bandsaw as opposed to Buddy plopping on the CNC, the mistakes accumulate. So I guess quick demo of how King Buzzo is probably going to spend the rest of his life with me. Doing this low tech, no backdrop. I didn't even change my shirt. Hopefully you can't see how dirty it is. One thing I've always liked about Les Pauls, they grab the gut well. So, and this is just some Epiphone pickup I had lying around, so I mean it really doesn't sound like much. those of you playing along at home, D, F sharp, A, A. Wouldn't mind having that. That is a G, I don't know. And for all you blues lawyers out there, you will notice there's supposed to be out of tune because it will work better. Yeah, so nothing's working, and it's just this. Like I said, most of the time it's going to be going through gain. So today down there, I've got the DS1. I invoked the DS1 in my last video. Someday I'll do a video on the DS1. I'll bring it really simple. Humbuckers, DS1, single coils, no. So basically this thing's going to be for doing, you know, this sort of thing here. I'm not going to remember how it goes. There you go. So hopefully you learned something about econo lawsuit, big air quote, guitars on here. Yeah, and hopefully this won't be sitting gathering dust for another year. There you go. Big old Northtown Sound. Thanks a lot for watching. Later.